Today we're talking about designing beautiful layouts. So let's get started. So the point of having a good layout is that the design, a good layout design does impact the entire reading experience. So imagine having a document that is very beautifully laid out. The text is very comfortably laid out on the pages. You have beautiful images. There's perfect pacing. What actually happens is people like to keep reading something like that. And when it's easy, there are factors in that that have to do with, this is beautiful, it's pleasant to me, but it's also about legibility. It's easy for me to read. That is a great reading experience. On the other side of that, or on the flip side, is poor reading experience. Reading something, it's a pamphlet or PDF or I don't know, like whatever, flyer or document, ebook, and it's hard to read. Like, it's difficult to read and you don't even kind of know what is it, but you have to put it down. You just can't keep going. Sometimes it's just, text is poor, that can happen. But sometimes the layout is difficult to follow. You constantly have to guess which part of them is supposed to read first. What is the hierarchy on this layout? Things like that. Maybe some text is too small to read. It's giving you a headache. You have to squint. Maybe the contrast is poor. You can't really see because there's a color background. All those things are going to give this impression, impact the experience in a way that the reader doesn't want to continue reading. So while we're talking about good layout design and we really want to make things look polished, professional, and beautiful, it also actually impacts the your reader's ability to finish the text. And if you do content marketing, if you have content that supports your programs, your courses, anything like that, or your coaching clients, anything like that, for these people to actually finish whatever document you've given them is really important. It obviously, of course, the number one is the content, and we want to share value, and that's really important. But if they never finish what they're reading because it's difficult to read, or the layout is uncomfortable, or it's just plain ugly, whatever kind of effort you put into the content was now wasted. So let's take a look at this and let's make sure that when you create, marketing content or content for your courses or programs, that it's always going to look beautiful, professional, and is a good reading experience for your audience. So let's keep moving. Number one, branding. So obviously your colors, things like that, are going to have impact on the layout. Sizing of things. So different sizings of fonts, pictures, margins, all kinds of sizings. All the elements that make your layout have a size, and that will impact the layout. Spacing. Now, we talked about sizing the elements. Now we're talking about spacing between the elements. That's a huge, huge thing, and we have more details on that a little bit later. And then pacing. And pacing is the comfortable pacing of the entire document, not just the elements, but how you lay out the content within your document. So we're going to talk about that as well. And what happens when all these elements are appropriately designed in your layout, you create balance and hierarchy. Hierarchy is really important for a reading experience because I need to know where I start from and where I finish. What do I need to read first? What second? What after that? And this is important because usually, especially if it's learning content, usually they are designed to one element built on top of another one. So I need to learn something before I can learn something else. So if you have courses or programs, it's critical that the hierarchy is very clear on your document. Where do I have to start? What do I read next? Balance is usually, human brain just likes things that are harmonious and balanced. So it has to do with, beautiful layout. Sometimes we break the balance on purpose. But if you're just starting out, I usually recommend that why don't you first try to create balanced layouts before you start breaking the rules. Sometimes when you break the balance and create a little bit of conflict in the layout itself, it can be quite impactful. Let's say if you have some like a big quote about some controversial topic, for example, maybe it's advantageous to break the balance to wake up the reader. But these are, like I said, fairly advanced topic. Today we're going to stick to the basics to make sure that you first learn to create beautiful balanced layouts, and then we're going to break the rules later, okay? So let's start with branding. So first of all, your brand guidelines usually consist of colors, fonts, photography style, and other design elements. Of course, logo is part of your branding, but we're not really concerned about that so much here in this layout design, more about the other elements in your brand guidelines. So like I mentioned, colors, your color library is critical. Your fonts, so usually I recommend people have 1 to 2 fonts, not too many. I'll get to that a little bit later here also. And then photography style. If you have a specific brand photography style, let's say, this is kind of oversimplification, but let's say that you have chosen that all your brand photography is black and white, then obviously that is going to give a specific feeling to anything you create, even your like design layouts and whatnot. And other design elements are things like, do you want to use gradients? Do you want to use background textures? Do you have illustrations? Let's say that you do a cookbook and you want to create kind of fun illustrations of, you know, baked goods or whatever. I don't know, I'm just, you know, throwing it out there. You want to make sure that those are also included in your brand guidelines so that your branding stays consistent throughout all the, you know, social media and whatnot, and also, of course, these layouts. So these brand elements all have personality. So we talk about brand personality, and you want to make sure your branding is inviting. That personality is something that your ideal customer finds inviting. You want to choose colors that they find pleasing or attractive. You want to make sure that you have fonts that are appropriate to use within your topic and also to your audience and so forth. Sorry, I jumped. There we go. So just make sure that your branding is done beforehand. And that way you have sort of the look and feel of your layouts, your marketing content established in a way. So obviously, like for example, colors and fonts have a huge implication of what your layouts are going to look like. Sizing, so we talked about this a little bit. So sizing creates hierarchy. So, one of the things, among others, it creates hierarchy. So for example, larger elements draw attention. So let's say, for example, when you are planning your, you know, your content on your layout, and you might have like, you know, headline or title, you might have like, you know, some sort of intro copy, and then you might have like body copy or the rest of the text and whatnot. Usually like the title would be larger. So larger sizes draw attention. That creates hierarchy. It tells me I need to look at the larger thing first. And then in the descending hierarchy, maybe the elements get either smaller or different color or something like that. So sizing is important from that point of view. It also applies to sizing of other elements, not just fonts or text. So think about that you have an icon. The larger the icon is, the more likely the I'm also a UX designer, so I talk about that stuff. So your reader is going to look at that. Or maybe you have a full page image. The bigger it is, someone's going to look at it. But also the brighter colors also create hierarchy. So that's something you want to think about as well. So sizing creates hierarchy. It also impacts the balance. So think about when you're creating a layout, all elements on your layout have weight. So, you know, weight. Larger, darker elements have more weight. Smaller, lighter colored elements, or, you know, outright, you know, outlines have lighter weight. So you want to make sure that when you divide your elements on the layout, that you, to create balance, you try to divide the weight evenly. And elements have weight, but also the space around the elements have weight. So imagine that you have 2 elements on the layout. The other one is big and black, and the other one is small and black. Now, if you allow ample area of white space around the small thing, that becomes sort of equal, or starts to become more equal weighted to when compared. So elements have weight, and then also the negative space has somewhat weight. So just make sure that you divide that weight evenly so that your layout doesn't seem like it's falling to any direction, or it doesn't feel lopsided, or doesn't feel crunched, too much stuff on one side and nothing on the other side, and things like that. And again, rules are meant to be broken. So when you are able to produce evenly weighted, beautiful, balanced layouts, it's time to start breaking the rules. But again, let's keep it simple and do things that we know first. And then this is really important. So make sure to use appropriate sizes for different font sizes to ensure legibility. So I wish there was a rule that I could say that always use, 12 points for your body copy, but there really isn't when it comes to marketing documents. There's some rules for internet, and well, we're not talking about that today, but there are rules for websites. But for PDF documents and stuff that, for example, these might be printed, someone might actually be reading it from paper, they might not be looking at it or, on their computer or anything like that. So the rules are more flexible, and really it comes down to a couple of things. One of those things is, what kind of font have you chosen? The simpler the font, the smaller you can make it. The more complicated design font, like for example, hand scripted things or lots of like twirly things in the font, you're probably gonna have to keep it larger. So test your fonts kind of like, if you are gonna create a printed document, print it out yourself and see, can I read this? Also, think about the sizing in the context of who's your audience. If your audience is 65 and up, I think it's safe to assume that you probably want to have larger fonts there. Okay. Third thing, spacing. So spacing also creates hierarchy by a grouping. So we talked about hierarchy already. I need to know which parts I read first, where to start, what is the title, what is the next thing, so forth. Spacing doesn't only, well, it creates space between elements on your layout, and the more there's space between something, and there's nothing in there, it's empty space, I'm going to start to pay attention to what's above that space. So spacing creates hierarchy by separating elements that don't belong together. So I know that is somewhere up there and this is somewhere down here, and they're not together. But it also creates hierarchy by grouping elements. So if there is less space between these elements here, I know this is a group and I'm supposed to read these as one group, and then there's space and then there's next group. So spacing is critical in establishing rules of what do I need to read and in which order. And this is what we talked a little bit just now. So it also helps creating balance by distributing the weight and introducing negative space. So we already talked about having negative space around some things. Negative space is essentially the white space, or sometimes we refer to white space just because, traditionally paper was white. Of course, these days it can be, especially if your documents are not created for printing, your background color can be anything. It doesn't have to be white. But don't be afraid of white space and negative space. So it gives a briefing break, and it introduces these little, helps with the grouping, and it introduces the layout to this weighted, like the idea of evenly distributing the weight. And it helps if there are some elements that don't have a lot of weight, adding negative space around them might help with creating that feeling of weight around that element. So I just got to kind of play with it and try it out. But my just like number one advice is don't be afraid of it. There's a lot of research these days, especially if your document is not going to be printed. So this research comes more from the world of internet, that people don't mind scrolling. So if your is PDF that people look at on their phone or they look at it on their computer, they don't actually mind scrolling. Of course, if you want to create a one-pager of something that is definitely printed, I would still say that the good reading experience trumps the idea of I have to fit everything in one page. But sometimes we have to make compromises too, so I understand that. And spacing also has very practical implications on your layout. So for example, is your document going to be printed? If it's printed, is it going to, or is it meant to be stapled or bound? So if you, let's say that you want to create a workbook for your course or your program, and the assumption is that everybody will print it out and bind it into some kind of binder. Well, you need to have more space on the spine side because that's where the binder is going to go. So things like that. So spacing, on one hand, it sort of gives the feeling of, balance and creates some hierarchy, but it also has some very practical implications. So think about like how big the margins have to be in your document, things like that. okay? And pacing. So this is more about the content and laying out the entire document rather than just one layout. But pacing is really important. It does create a pleasant, more impactful overall reading experience for your document if done well. So I really recommend that you pay attention to pacing. It sort of allows room for some thoughtful reading so that it gives meaningful breaks. It actually helps remembering things if the pacing is correct, because it creates much more pleasant experience, and it can highlight what is important. For example, if you have a very important quote that you want to highlight in your document, you reserve the entire page for it and put the quote in the middle. It gives a little break for the reader, but it also highlights the idea that this quote is important. It impacted my thinking, it impacted this document. It's really, you know, has the core thought of something. So things like that. So pacing is critical by communicating the emphasis of some things as well. So this is what I like to explain to people is, think of an orchestra playing a symphony. There are, moments where just the strings play, and there are moments when just the flute plays, and then there are moments when everybody's playing. So not during this symphony, all instruments don't play all the time. There are time for this and time for that, and that's how the music flows. That should be your document. Especially if it's multi-page document, there should be like some sort of comfortable pacing that carries the reader throughout the entire document. So how do you create this? Well, you have to highlight what the important things are in your document, and you have to figure out where you want the reader to take a little break and process what they just read. And you do this well. To do this well, you need to have all your content created first, so that you can plan the order. You can plan, like, actually, I think this needs, a section opener for clearly communicating that something new is going to start here. This needs that big quote page to give a break for thinking. This here, I'm just going to add a page of one page for a listing of something, rather than trying to push it into some other, because you want people to just focus on that one thing. And when you have all your content created and you know exactly what the content is going to be like, make a little thumbnails on Post-it notes. Well, I like to make thumbnails because I'm visual. So you could have draw the little layout, like a thumbnail sketch of your layouts, and then you can, of course, write on it what it was, so you'll remember what was the content that was supposed to go there. And then you can plot the entire thing on Post-it notes on the wall, and it's easy because you can just swap them. I frequently do this also just by reading or drawing little thumbnails on a piece of paper, but the disadvantage is that if I'm like, oh, that page is in the wrong place, I got to scrap it and restart. So that's why Post-it notes are clever, because you can move them around. So if you don't like drawing thumbnails, then at least write what is the content. You could use different color Post-it notes for like section openers, pull quotes, things like that. Okay, whoops, sorry, I'm jumping. So I also want to remind you that when you're creating documents that are meant to be read, legibility is super critical. So legibility means that the user or the reader is actually able to read it. They're able to tell the letters apart, and they're able to read the whole thing. So first of all, make sure all your texts are legible, regardless of the size. Make sure that whatever font you're using, so size is right, the font style. So think carefully if the font is difficult to read. Sometimes I see scripts that are very difficult to read. You could probably get away with if you use a script for just one word as an emphasis and as a larger word as a decoration of some kind, but it's difficult if it's like multiple lines or even like a title of some kind. So it can be difficult. So make sure that you use appropriate fonts, you use them in their correct size, and that you have a color that is legible. So for example, very light colors can be difficult to read. So for example, yellow text on white page can be very painful. So make sure that you can actually see the text. So contrast. So if you have a color background, you have to make sure that the color of the font is now in contrast enough so it's legible and you can see it. The other one is the photo background. So if you're using photo behind, I quite often recommend that you put a little color cube. You can knock back the opacity and make it transparent, but you have to make sure that the text is legible. So make sure there's contrast, enough contrast between the text and whatever is as the background, okay? And a few extra tips. So remember, don't overstuff your pages. So I already mentioned, don't be afraid of the white space. It's good. It's good to give a little breathing room. Remember, it does create hierarchy and balance when used appropriately. Use different font. Oh, there's a spelling error. Use different fonts sparingly. So there's not like a super rule about this. I usually tell people to use 2, don't use more than 2. You can get away with just using 1 if the font that you choose has a lot of different styles, like, you know, ultralight, light, medium, regular, bold, you know, all this different. If it has different weights, you could actually get away with 1. I actually had a type teacher in grad school who, if the students were not doing their typography well enough, if she wasn't pleased, she would take away their fonts and say, you can only use 1 font. Now I will give you just 1 typeface. And then that student was only allowed to use that 1 typeface for that semester. And at the end, of course, if they suddenly got much better, she allowed them to use 2 typefaces or something like that. But so that's why I say you can actually get away with 1. Don't go beyond 3, because the more fonts you add, the more it's actually work for you to make sure that you're always using it consistently. Because once you establish the rules, you should not be breaking them too much. And I know I've said a couple times during this that, hey, go break the rules after you know them. But what I mean by that is that your layout is a system of design. It's a system that is supposed to be recognizable. Headlines or titles are this font. Captions are this font. People's names I highlight with this color, so that, you know, it creates a system for the reader. So every time I see a specific size and font, I remember, oh, that's a headline, so I know something starts from here. So, and then if you start breaking that too much, it becomes a problem of inconsistency and it becomes jarring for the reader. So there are some rules that you just don't want to break. And when it comes to colors, if you want to play it safe, only use 2 to 3 colors. Now, this depends on your brand. Maybe your brand is like a circus and there's all the colors in the world and you want to keep it that way. That's fine. That's why I'm saying if you want to play it safe. But if you're unsure and you want to make sure that your layouts look peaceful, balanced, and comfortable, then what I would do is I would at least start with like maybe 1 or 2 colors. Sorry, 2 or, well, you could actually get away with just using 1, 2, but like up to 3 colors. And then you can use different transparencies. So you can use different opacities of these colors, and that's fine. The same thing as with the fonts, the more colors that introduce, the more difficult it, or I shouldn't say difficult, more challenging it becomes for managing all that. And most of all, be consistent. Whatever you choose, be consistent, because like I said, you are establishing a system around your content. So that's good for the reader to understand moving forward within your document what to expect. Okay, great. So now I talked about layout design. If you need a template, I know there's a couple of people in this group who already purchased the Daily Creative template kit. So go to dailycreative.io/layout kit. And actually, I'm just going to show you what it looks like. So bear with me. So it actually looks like this. So, well, the page that you're going to land into looks like this. And there's a little bit of explanation of what is the ultimate freebie template. And I call it the ultimate freebie template because it really is optimized for content marketing. That's what I do a lot. So I create all kinds of guides and checklists, and then have people sign up for email and they get something like this, or they get a PDF of some kind. So if you do the same practice, this is really good because, you know, it has all the classic content marketing elements, checklists, step-by-step guides, you know, worksheets, you know, all kinds of infographics and things like that. But it also has a lot of layouts where if you just wanted to do I don't know, like an ebook. It has basic text layouts as well. I actually also included recipe cards because I know some health coaches who do recipes, and I don't know, I thought it was a nice design. But so this is actually kind of your go-to kit for freebies. So if you have to create lead magnets, but also if you need to create supporting documents for your programs or your courses. So I'm going to give you a little sneak peek into it. So let me just, maybe I'll do this. Okay, so this is the document, and it's a little heavy, so bear with me if there's loading issues. So you get all these different cover templates. There are some templates for chapter openers. There are some text layouts, some checklists, step-by-step guide templates. Here, as you can see, a different kind of ways to represent your what are the steps. There are a few infographics for you to be able to portray your process or the process that maybe your coaching client goes through or something like that. Of course, those can also be presented by the step-by-step guides. There's a couple of different like calendar templates or journal templates, worksheets if you wanted your customers to be able to fill in some sort of worksheet thing. And then some recipe cards, like I mentioned. And then these promotional templates for, all the stuff that you can do with, like, you just plop images here. And let me show you. I had a couple of examples here where you could, I think those are super fun. So for example, I know it's tiny, but that's down with that. Maybe I have here. Oh, sorry, those are covers. No, I'm sorry, they're tiny. I can post like a screenshot or something in there for better viewing, but yeah, you can like plop your images of your layouts in there and create these kind of mock-ups. Anyways, so this is super easy to use. It's all in Canva. It's only $37. So if you are interested, I'm going to drop a link here in the comments and go take a look at it. So if you have any questions, drop in the comments and I will come and answer your questions. And I hope you have a great rest of the week. And I'll talk to you later. Happy designing.